This is Product Management, the podcast powered by Alpha. Welcome. We feature the brightest minds across the numerous disciplines that fuel modern product teams. Join over 15,000 weekly listeners to learn from product leaders, authors, and founders from companies such as Adobe, Shopify, Viacom, Under Armour, and many more. They'll share their insights and best practices for experimentation, user research, leadership, corporate innovation, and more. To receive updates on the latest episodes of this show, subscribe to our weekly newsletter at thisisproductmanagement.com. To learn more about Alpha, the platform that has powered thousands of product experiments for the world's leading brands, visit alphahq.com.
Hey, I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. Welcome back. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Eric Ries, the author of the product management staple, The Lean Startup, and a recently released book called The Startup Way. He'll share the lessons he's learned working with startups and large companies to reignite entrepreneurship and the management practices companies need to adopt to enable innovation.
I am Eric Ries. I'm the author of The Lean Startup and the new book, The Startup Way, as well as the CEO of the Long-Term Stock Exchange. And I guess the new book is a lot about what I have learned about trying to drive innovation in the 6 years since The Lean Startup was published, both in the situation where startups become large companies inadvertently. They go through hypergrowth and they get past product market fit, and they go from having one product team to having a whole portfolio of product teams. And where the CEO or founder has to internalize the lesson that they're not the only entrepreneur in the building anymore and figure out how to empower their entrepreneurial teams in order to preserve the company. How, conversely, an established company can try to restore or recreate that startup DNA. Continuous transformation is product management.
Many of the startups that implemented Lean when the book was first published have since grown to become larger companies, but have lost sight of the entrepreneurial practices that have helped them get there. Similarly, large companies are increasingly trying to adopt entrepreneurial practices to build the next generation of products. I'm excited to hear what Eric has learned about driving innovation from within established companies that led him to publishing The Startup Way. But first, I asked him about what inspired him to write The Lean Startup.
First of all, I didn't get into technology. Technology found me. I was one of those kids that has loved technology as long as I can remember. And I grew up in my parents' basement programming computers, just like the cliche. My dad bought an old beige IBM XT. Anyone remembers that machine? And all I wanted to do was get the manual out and learn how to program in BASIC and make it do stuff. And I've always loved programming and technology and software. That's my background. I happened to be in college during the dot-com bubble, so that's when the entrepreneurial bug bit me, and I did startups, from my dorm room that were total failures, and eventually found my way to Silicon Valley, where I felt like I should try to apprentice myself to the real, professional entrepreneurs who really knew how to do technology entrepreneurship, and then had a bunch more failure because they didn't necessarily know any better than I did what we were supposed to be doing. And I eventually started to pioneer a set of what started out as software management, product development, product management techniques, because my intuition was that the problems we were having as engineers were being caused by having customers too distant from the process, from going too slow, from not being scientific enough in our decision making. And so by the time I was in a position to be building my own software teams and having some success as an entrepreneur finally, it was by doing things in a really, at that time, very counterintuitive way. And I, at some point, started to blog about the ideas and tell those stories a little more publicly. And I called the collection of ideas together the Lean Startup, the application of lean manufacturing principles to the innovation process itself.
Eric brought a scientific approach to entrepreneurship that involved getting feedback from customers and iterating throughout the product lifecycle. He then applied this approach at large companies such as General Electric. I asked Eric what challenges he's faced when working with large companies.
What I would say the biggest realization is that the startup movement globally has developed a series of what I would call management practices that we universally adopt and believe in. but we don't really ever talk about. We kind of view them as too obvious to be worth mentioning. Things like every startup has a board. The way we fund startups is using what I now call metered funding, but rounds of financing with fixed budgets. We believe that small teams can beat big teams. We believe that the quality of an idea is irrelevant unless it's embedded within the lived experience of an actual team. Can you imagine if on Sand Hill Road they first came up with an idea and then assigned it to an entrepreneur versus the way we do it, which is, of course, that an entrepreneur builds a team around a specific vision and then they pitch that to an investor. You know, the way we do metrics and leading indicators, and I could go on and on about our universal practice as well, because that's the water that I have swam in my whole career. It never occurred to me to view those as a system until I started to see companies who I thought would know better misapply those rules. So even though, I know a lot of founders who have been through Y Combinator, they graduate, they now have a unicorn company and has thousands of employees. But the way that they build teams internally, do they build small teams or large teams? A lot of those companies, they start building very big teams. Do they work cross-functionally or do they have people in functional silos? They wind up having their internal startups, their new product initiatives run according to the standard big company playbook. And so they run into problems that they themselves would have found inconceivable when they were starting out. And I ask them all the time, if one of your product managers doesn't ship anything for 6 months, which is like a very common problem in a lot of companies, you start a new project and you just sit there in requirements gathering mode and you're trying to get the architecture figured out and you have all these experts and middle managers weighing in and plussing up the scope. Would your early stage of investors have allowed that? If you had behaved that way in the early days, would your company have survived? Of course, the answer is no. But why is this problem of building a brand new product to bring your company into a new market or to pursue a new customer segment or to solve a new problem? Why is that really any different than founding the company in the first place? So I kept seeing those mistakes being made again and again. And of course, because of the success of Lean Startup, a lot of established companies started asking me to come in and help them transform their practice and transform their culture to be more innovative. And I kept seeing the same problems again and again. We have internal startup teams, but we're not actually acknowledging that they face startup level uncertainty. And so we're not using startup appropriate management techniques.
Startups have developed a series of management practices such as metered funding, small team sizes, frequent releases, and metrics-driven development that have led to breakout innovations. Frequently, however, large companies struggle to adopt these practices. How does Eric bridge the gap between how large companies currently work and the practices he's developed in the Lean Startup?
I'll tell you a story, and this is not a software story, because part of what's interesting about the last 5 years of my life is how many non-software, non-tech businesses have adopted these ideas. We're here at the Lean Startup Conference. We had a whole number of sessions about Lean Startup for national defense and industrial applications in healthcare, and really quite a wild array. So I was working with a team that makes a gas turbine, a natural gas turbine that is sold into a combined cycle power plant. So we're talking about a power plant that will cost a utility something like $1 billion to build and then has to run for 30 or 40 years. So this is hardly a software gizmo. This is no app, very serious product development initiative. And one of my least favorite words in the entire product development vocabulary is the word requirements. Because the truth is, when we're building product, the laws of physics are required, but everything else is optional. Everything else is at best a hypothesis. And here's a team that had gotten themselves totally wrapped up in requirements gathering. They basically said, our goal for this project is to build a turbine that is 5% more efficient than our competitors. And they asked the engineers to estimate how long that will take to design and build. And I can't remember the numbers now, but I think they said something like 4 years. And they said, great, so we'll be done in 4 years. But then someone else said, but hold on, we want it to be 5% more efficient than our competitors' products 4 years from now. We better extrapolate the best-in-class efficiency of our competitors' products 4 years from now and re-estimate with this new target in mind. They did the new estimate, and now it was going to take 6 years. I said, okay, now this project will take 6 years, but you know what's coming next? Someone said, but wait a minute, 6 years from now, the competitor's efficiency will have improved. We have to re-estimate. And they had basically gotten in this loop where they kept making the problem harder and harder and harder by gathering more and more and more requirements. And next thing you know, this project was going to take infinite time, effectively. There's no way for them to get it done. But of course, totally unspoken in this entire process is a hypothesis that a turbine with a certain efficiency target would be desirable to customers. And that leap of faith assumption, as we would call it in Lean Startup terms, that's something that we can be experimenting with right now. We don't have to actually have completely built the product to understand whether the requirements that we think customers have are in fact the ones they really have. And that pattern is something we see over and over and over again when we're trying to implement lean startup, no matter what the industry or size of company or sector, that our project plans, our budgets, our forecasts are all based around assumptions about what we think customers will want. I'll give you a startup example. I was with a startup team that was maybe 40 people. They were doing great, hot company, everything's growing and doing well. And they had this problem that they would have these product meetings where they were doing very classic agile. They had a product owner. The product owner would prioritize the backlog, and then the team would build what was specified, and then they would see growth. Well, they were in a period where they weren't seeing the kind of growth that they wanted, and they were nervous about why that was. And I remember having a meeting with the team, and I asked the product owner, how do you know what to prioritize in the backlog? And they said, well, it's based on my understanding of the customer. I said, well, what is that understanding based on? And they were kind of offended that I would even ask this question. Like, that's my job. I'm the product owner. I'm the customer's representative to this process. That's terrific. But just because you know that the customer is a 24-year-old, person who lives in this place and has this much disposable income, but these psychographic and demographic facts about the customer, how do you know that prioritizing this story over that story will produce the specific improvements in growth or customer satisfaction or anything? And of course, once we really started talking about it, I said, well, gosh, I don't know, but I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that. I don't want my team to think that I don't have confidence in what I'm saying. But on the other hand, I do kind of feel like a fraud. I'm constantly being asked to make these decisions that I don't really have the proper knowledge and data to make. So when we reframe the problem, not as prioritizing the backlog in terms of what features are going to get built, but prioritizing what experiments do we want to run to test the hypotheses, it opened up a lot of new possibilities, including the ability for the product owner themselves to start to learn what really matters to customers, not based on assumptions or guesses, but based on real experimental data. Here's another example from that same team. I remember they were talking about pricing. How do you know you have the right price for this product? The product owner said, well, if it's more expensive, people will complain. They won't like it. They can't afford it. But how do you really know? We don't really know. Well, if we have to always be right about everything, then every change is a huge fight. It's like, oh, you're going to change pricing permanently for everybody? What about the previous customers? What does this mean for our forecast? And it's like we have to have the debate about the politics of the thing before we know whether it's a good idea or not. But when we use the technique from the startup we call minimum viable product, a radically de-scoped experiment for the purpose of maximizing learning, not just being small, the purpose is to have a good learning experiment. That team did an experiment where they took, I think it was 10% of new customers and showed them a different pricing page, different value prop, and charged, I think it was 3 times as much money as the original, and conversion rates were the same. And it's like they just found free money lying there on the road that they had no idea that they could take. They were dramatically undercharging for their product, and they had no idea. Now, not every company, when they run that experiment, is going to find that out. But most companies, when I ask them where does their pricing come from, it's not really based on anything rigorous, because it's considered too controversial to try radically different pricing experiments, because we don't treat them like experiments. We treat them like decisions that we get to make, and then we just roll it out by mandate.
Eric recommends forming hypotheses about what customers want and running experiments to validate those hypotheses. Instead of prioritizing your backlog, prioritize the experiments you want to run, he says. I asked Eric how executives can encourage managers to work on experiments that might take a long time to pay off or might never pay off.
If we're going to build an entrepreneurial management system, this is more than just a few tips and tricks and techniques. So this is one of the challenging things about this is in the startup way, I try to outline a series of overlapping and interlocking techniques that work together to try to solve this problem. And the first, a foundation of all management, is how we hold people accountable. So if we just put up posters that say, hey, everybody in the company, be more innovative, we just tell people, hey, you should take risks or whatever, but then we don't really mean it, people are able to listen with their wallet as well as with their ears. So if we say we want you to be innovative and take risks, but we punish people if they fail or perceive to fail in terms of their career advancement and promotion possibilities, then not only are we not going to get any innovation, we're actually then going to damage our standing with our employees. We're just going to come across as hypocrites. So what we need to do is build a program, like an intentionally designed program, to encourage this style of experimentation. In the book, I talk about a program we built at GE called FastWorks, eventually had us training thousands of their managers, and eventually wound up reforming a number of their deep systems in HR and finance and IT. But it didn't start that way. It started with one project. We got a permission from a series of executives to run a pilot program with one project, the Series X diesel reciprocating platform, not a software project. They wanted to try it on something industrial. And then that project went well, and then we were able to do a cohort of 4 projects. So it's GE, so they make a lot of different stuff. We did a healthcare project, a neonatal incubator. We did a refrigerator. We did a bunch of non-product projects. We started to look at IT systems and HR systems. So, we were doing 4 projects at a time, and then 8 projects at a time. And then eventually we had built up a critical mass of examples that even big corporate people, when given a different structure, when given a different opportunity to work in a new way, could become dramatically more innovative, including several of these teams that started to operate like true startups. I mean, like they really started to behave like real founders, like the people I know here in Silicon Valley. It was not uncommon for people to say, what did you put in the water? Like, what's the trick? How did you trick this person into becoming an entrepreneur? There's no trick. It's just a different series of incentives, a different system that's empowering them to work in a new way. Well, once we had overcome the kind of initial set of skepticism, once we had proof points from every division of the company, from every function, from every region, then it made sense for us to go to senior management and say, hey, let's go big with this. Let's train the whole company, give everyone the opportunity to work like an entrepreneur when it's appropriate. So the details of how we do that later stage expansion matter a great deal, but also the details of how we set up those pilot programs also mattered a great deal.
At GE, Eric started with one project before rolling out to more teams, including IT and HR. Building up a critical mass of success stories helped him make the case for more significant changes to the organization. How does Eric recommend entrepreneurs handle conversations with key stakeholders to brace them for change?
It's incredibly difficult. And people talk about this like, oh, people are resistant to change, but that's not true. People are being very rational in responding to the incentives that they face. The concept I talk about in the book is career equity. The true compensation for most people and most organizations are compensated is not really their current salary and bonus. It really is their perception of future career prospects in the organization. So yes, I might get, if you pay someone a small bonus this year if they do something innovative, but then they're afraid that if they're perceived to be a failure, that will mean they won't get promoted to the job they've dreamed about since they were a kid. The bonus is irrelevant compared to that perception. So the interpersonal side of this, we have to come in and create a safe space for having a real honest-to-God conversation about what works and doesn't work in the company. Creating that context for what we call a commitment to the truth, real integrity in conversation, that requires an act of leadership to get started. And that doesn't have to be the CEO or some senior executive. Any leader in any part of the company can decide, you know what, I'm going to have a real conversation with my team. So, for example, I was working with a leader who was the executive sponsor for one of these early teams in a lean startup transformation and told me this story. He said, well, one of the things I was doing per the recommendations of Lean Startup is I was having a regular pivot or persevere meeting with this team, this innovation team. Now, a pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. That's probably Lean Startup's most well-known or infamous buzzword, depending on your point of view. So he was having this conversation regularly. And because he's a senior leader, that was one of like a million meetings he would have that day. And one day, he hung up the phone with his team's pivot or persevere meeting. And the very next call, on his calendar, he just looked, regional sales update from a regional sales manager. I can't remember what, I think in Eastern Europe or something, American executive. Takes the phone call, and the regional sales manager says, boss, I got bad news. We have this new product we're trying to launch in our region, and we had the sales quota. We missed our quota by a lot. I'm really sorry. And the way he described it, the leader described it to me, he said, as soon as he said that, I knew what I was supposed to do. I have a certain playbook that, I know the drill. I got to take this guy's head off and make sure he understands that failure is not an option. And then he said, but I had this moment. I was like, I was behaving very differently a moment ago in this pivot or persevere meeting. What would happen, just as an experiment, if I took that behavior and applied it to this meeting? So he said, instead of yelling at the guy, he said, okay, well, what did you learn? And how do you know? Those are two of the most important questions in a lean startup style review. What did you learn and how do you know? And the regional sales manager was so shocked, it was like almost a full minute of silence that he was expecting to get yelled at. He couldn't believe that he was really being asked. And he said, well, boss, if you really want to know the truth, do you? Yeah, please tell me. He said, well, there's a problem. This region, there's an indigenous competitor to our product that's actually very well entrenched. And so our go-to-market playbook that we normally use in most regions not working here. He said, how do you know? He wanted to make sure it wasn't some BS story. He pressed into the details, tried to understand, and he realized the results he had gotten from the sales manager had nothing to do with best effort, had everything to do with a bad plan, a plan that he himself had authorized, right? This is an issue of the system, not an issue of the person. And because they were able to create even a momentary glimpse of a safe space to have that conversation, he learned something he never would have otherwise been able to find out.
Employees are rational in their resistance to change, Eric says. People want to maintain their career equity so that they can continue to advance within the company. To accommodate these needs, leaders can bring the pivot or persevere approach to other parts of their organization. This entails asking, what did you learn and how do you know, instead of always demanding immediate results. I asked Eric for one small but effective way that product leaders can get their company started in working the startup way.
I think most people have heard about the Amazon 2-pizza team rule. There's certain problems at Amazon that they say the right way to approach that is to put a 2-pizza team on it. That means a team that's no larger than you can feed with 2 pizzas. And it's just a rule of thumb they have for when they want to try something new, wacky, difficult, or scary. So if you don't have a rule like that in your own organization, try making one and say, I call it in the book, the startup as an atomic unit of work. Next time someone asks you to design a new product or a new program or take an existing product to a new market or create a new IT system or a new HR system or any kind of project that has uncertainty about whether it's going to work or not. First of all, let's just be honest that a lot of our projects, we don't know if they're going to work or not. We don't know if they're a good idea. We hope, we think, we have a hypothesis. So the next time you get confronted with a project like that, put a 2-pizza team on it and give them a fixed budget. This is the hardest thing for most corporate managers. Don't say like, hey, I'll check in with you in a few weeks. Let me know how it's going. But say either, here's $1 million total cost. You can spend it on whatever you want, but don't you dare ask me for more money unless you've learned something really valuable. Or if you don't have the power to do a budget like that, do it based on time. Like there's a number of government stories in the book of really visionary entrepreneurial leaders in the social sector, public sector context that are able to say, listen, you have 90 days to run this experiment and report back. And, you have these teams, the first time they're told that, they're like, okay, this project, I guarantee you, will be disbanded in 90 days unless you have what we call in these startup terms, validated or scientific learning about what works or doesn't. It's a focusing device to get a small team, that scarcity mindset, that kind of scrappy intensity that startups have, and get them focused on learning how to solve a problem. So a 2-pizza team with a cross-functional, dedicated 100% team. So rather than have a 25-person part-time committee, put 3 or 5 people on it full-time, give them 90 days, see what happens. If anyone's listening and finds this interesting, I hope you will run an experiment. Don't take my word for it. I really try hard to subscribe to the Peter Drucker school. He said, now people call me a guru because they can't spell charlatan. So, don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. Go experiment and learn for yourself.
Eric has provided great illustrations of how 2-pizza teams, metered budgeting, and experiment-driven product development can help companies reignite entrepreneurship and innovation. Next up is the benchmark. Let's hear how Eric reflects on the next series of questions we ask all interviewees to ask themselves.
Obviously, you should read my new book, The Startup Way, and then naturally, and really, just buying one copy, how could that be enough? How could you ever have enough copies? So of course, make your whole team read it, and that will solve all your problems instantly. But then when it doesn't solve your problem, there's a whole bunch of related books, dive into this in specific verticals or specific areas. That we do a whole series called the Lean Series with O'Reilly, and a bunch of those books are linked to my website. We also do a conference every year in San Francisco called the Lean Startup Conference, where people can come and see practitioners talk about these ideas at scale and in different contexts. And we put the videos every year for that conference for free online, so people can go hear practitioners speak about it in their own words. And then wherever your listeners are, no matter what city in the world you're in, there is a Lean Startup meetup in a city near you. You can always find grassroots practitioners who are eager to talk about these kinds of ideas. And especially for those of you who are listening who don't think of yourself as a traditional entrepreneur, for whom that's like kind of a strange idea. That I'm at the conference now, we're doing it now, and there's thousands of people here, and a lot of them work at big companies, and their business card doesn't say founder, doesn't say entrepreneur, it just says product manager, something like that, line leader, P&L leader, product line leader. The idea that they could go to an event and mix and mingle with startups if they have something in common, and that there's kind of a shared tribe of folks who are thinking in this new way, is actually really empowering and really exciting. So maybe give that a shot. There's so many great ways. I mean, the first thing is you just got to force yourself to do it. I'll give you an example. I was working with an auto manufacturer, and the folks were from the research division. So they were not used to talking to customers. They were used to doing technology research and building design concepts and thinking great thoughts. And we were in a meeting about how could they get out of the building? How could they get some customers? And I remember saying to them, why don't we put a Craigslist ad that just says, hey, seeking beta testers for a new thing. They said, we can't do that. We can't put the company's logo and brand name on Craigslist. I said, that's okay. You don't have to say who you are. Just say auto manufacturer seeking experiment, and have a little survey for people to sign up, and we'll see if anyone's interested. And while we were arguing about whether to do this or not, I just pulled out my laptop during the argument and started typing. And by the time that we had settled the argument that we decided that we could do this, we already had 100 people signed up to be beta testers. I think there was such enthusiasm for what they were doing out there. And it didn't have to be some big complicated thing. My new favorite podcast is the West Wing Weekly, where Rishikesh Hirway and Josh Molina from the show review an episode of one per week. That's pretty fun. We are living through a golden age of science fiction writing right now. There's just so many great things. I might plug in particular Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. It's just terrific. New product. Was it cliche to say Alexa? I'm just super excited about Alexa, which has dramatically changed the amount of music I listen to in my house. I'm trying to think if I have anything more avant-garde to say. I mean, there's so many great apps coming out every day now. Headspace is really terrific. It's just a crazy slew of mobile and casual games that consume a ton of wasted time. I'm pretty excited about those.
Listeners can learn more about Eric's new book at thestartupway.com and his events at leanstartup.co. That's our show. Until next time, this is Mike Fishbein from Alpha. If you enjoy the show, I encourage you to go beyond iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud and subscribe on our website, thisisproductmanagement.com. Every Monday, you'll get an email from me with the latest episode, exclusive product management resources, discounts to conferences, and opportunities to ask future guests a question that will be aired on the show. Visit thisisproductmanagement.com to subscribe.